The haunting signal of the Andorran expanse. The eclipsed dawn drifted silently through the void, its dark hull absorbing the faint starlight. For weeks, the crew had been chasing a ghost signal, a distress call emanating from the uncharted fringes of the Andorran expanse. Captain Reyna Holt stared at the blinking red dot on the navigation console. The signal pulsed at irregular intervals, its tone low and distorted, like a scream muffled by static. "Still no ID on the source?" Reyna asked, her voice sharp with frustration. "No, ma'am," replied Lieutenant Anders, the comms officer. His hands hovered nervously over his console. "The signal's too degraded, but whatever sent it, it's big and old." "Big and old don't scream like this," muttered Chief Engineer Zeke. He sat in the corner, tinkering with a faulty tool. "I don't like this. Feels wrong." Reyna ignored him and turned to the ship's AI interface, Nova. "Distance to the signal." "Approximately 12,000 kilometers," Nova replied, her voice calm and unfeeling. "We will arrive in 10 minutes." As the ship approached, the source of the signal came into view, a massive derelict structure floating in the void. Its jagged edges jutted out like the ribs of a long-dead beast, and its surface was coated in a dull reddish hue that glistened faintly under the ship's lights. "It's not a station," Anders said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a ship, or what's left of one." Reyna's stomach tightened. The ship's design was ancient, predating known galactic civilizations. Massive spires rose from its surface, each pulsing faintly in time with the distress signal. "Dock us," Reyna ordered, her voice steady. "We're going in." The docking bay of the derelict was eerily intact, its vast space illuminated by flickering crimson lights. Reyna, Anders, and Zeke descended the ramp in full exosuits, their footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The air was thick and cold, carrying the faint, metallic scent of decay. "Keep comms open," Reyna instructed, "and stay close." The team moved cautiously, their lights cutting through the shadows. The interior was labyrinthine, with narrow corridors lined by panels that seemed to pulse faintly, as if the ship were alive. Strange markings covered the walls, spirals and jagged lines etched deep into the metal. And then, the first sound. A low, wet scraping noise echoed through the corridor, sending chills down their spines. Zeke froze, his eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" Reyna nodded, her hand tightening around her pulse rifle. "Stay alert." As they rounded a corner, they found the source of the sound. A trail of dark, viscous liquid smeared across the floor, leading deeper into the ship. The red lights overhead flickered erratically, casting shifting shadows that seemed to writhe like living things. "Whatever happened here?" Anders began, but his voice trailed off as a new noise emerged, a faint, rhythmic tapping, growing louder and closer. "Back to the ship," Reyna hissed, her instincts screaming danger. But as they turned, the corridor behind them sealed shut with a deafening clang, the walls shifting as if the ship were rearranging itself. "Captain," Nova's voice crackled over the comms. "I'd lost your signal. Are you?" The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving them in deafening silence. The oppressive silence pressed against their ears as they stood frozen, staring at the sealed wall. The rhythmic tapping grew louder, echoing through the corridor from all directions. Reyna's flashlight flickered, casting jagged beams of light across the pulsing walls. "Move," Reyna commanded, forcing her legs to move. "We need to find another way back." As they pressed deeper into the ship, the air grew colder, their breath fogging the visors of their suits. The markings on the walls became more intricate, forming grotesque faces with hollow eyes that seemed to watch them. The tapping sound shifted, becoming a faint whispering, a chorus of voices speaking in an unintelligible language. What is that?" Zeke stammered, his voice trembling. "Are we hearing things?" Reyna didn't answer. Her focus was on the path ahead, but her hands trembled as she gripped her rifle. The ship was alive, and it was aware of their presence. They entered a large chamber, its walls lined with strange cylindrical pods. Each pod contained a figure, humanoid but grotesquely twisted, their faces frozen in silent screams. The crimson light bathed the room in a nightmarish glow. "Oh God," Anders whispered. "Are they alive?" Before anyone could answer, one of the pods began to vibrate. A sharp crack split the air as its glass shattered, and the figure inside fell to the floor with a sickening thud. Its body twitched, its limbs bending unnaturally as it rose to its feet. Empty, glowing sockets stared at them, and its mouth opened in a soundless scream. "Run!" Reyna shouted, firing her rifle. The pulse shot struck the creature, but it barely flinched. The team bolted down a corridor, the creature's distorted movements echoing behind them. The walls began to shift again, closing off paths and creating new ones. The ship was hurting them, guiding them deeper into its heart. The whispering voices grew louder, now forming fragments of words. "Join us, become." The team stumbled into another chamber, this one dominated by a massive, pulsating orb suspended in midair. Tendrils of energy snaked from the orb into the walls, feeding the ship. The whispers became deafening, and the orb pulsed violently. "It's the core," Anders gasped. "This is what's controlling everything." Reyna didn't hesitate. She raised her rifle and fired, the pulse shots striking the orb. It screamed, a piercing, inhuman sound that reverberated through their skulls. The lights in the chamber flickered, and the walls began to crumble. "We need to destroy it," Reyna shouted. "All of it." The orb thrashed violently, its tendrils flailing as the ship shuddered around them. Reyna and Zeke fired relentlessly, their shots tearing into the core. Anders worked furiously at his console, trying to overload the ship's systems. "It's fighting back," Anders shouted, his hands trembling as he input commands. "We don't have much time." The walls began to close in, and the creature from the pod appeared again, its movements jerky and unnatural. It wasn't alone. More pods shattered, and grotesque figures emerged, their hollow eyes glowing with malevolent light. "Cover me," Anders yelled, sweat dripping down his face. "I just need a few more seconds." Reyna and Zeke formed a line, their rifles blazing as the creatures charged. The air was thick with the smell of burning ozone and the screeches of the advancing horrors. The orb's pulses grew erratic, each one sending shockwaves through the ship. "Got it," Anders shouted. "The overload set. Run." The team bolted for the corridor as the chamber erupted in flames. The orb screamed one final time before exploding, its energy ripping through the ship. The walls shuddered violently, and the red lights dimmed. Reyna pushed her team forward, their path illuminated by the flickering remnants of the ship's systems. The creatures fell behind, their movements slowed by the collapse of the core's control. They reached the docking bay just as the Eclipse Dawn re-established connection. Nova's voice crackled over the comms. "Captain, systems are failing. Get aboard now." The team scrambled onto the ship, the docking ramp closing behind them. The Eclipse Dawn pulled away just as the derelict imploded, its remains swallowed by the void. In the aftermath, Reyna sat in the dim light of her quarters, staring at the red beacon still blinking faintly on the nav console. The signal was gone, but its echo lingered in her mind. The ship had been alive, but what had created it, and why?